Welcome back to another spoiler roundup for Arkham Horror's next expansion, The Drowned City. This one's gonna have fewer cards, but there's one card that just came out, just got spoiled, that's so interesting, it nearly deserves an entire video to its own. So we're gonna cover that last. We're gonna talk about Transfiguration and its applications such as I currently understand them at the end, and let's get through everything else first. Up front, we have Locked and Loaded. It's a 3-cost experienced asset. It's permanent, limit 1 per deck, and it gives all your firearm assets with useless ammo 1 additional starting ammo. To be honest, I really wish this card was a little bit more pushed. I wish it was 2 experience and more widely available. I wish it didn't have the limit 1 per deck. I wish it was 4 or 5 experience and gave 2 additional ammo. As it is, it's not enough to be like build enabling for anything. It's obviously not bad. I'm not saying that it's bad. It's in line with like upgrading an overpower. It's not something you're gonna buy immediately that you build around like Astronomical Atlas. It's not even just a core fantastic upgrade like Deduction level 2. It's just a thing that generically makes your deck better, that you get somewhere between like 20 and 40 experience if you're building a firearm deck. And this is very specifically for the lots of small firearms build, stuff like a Leo DeLuca running all the rogue guns as well. It's not really for stuff like Flamethrower, right? Because generally when you use super big guns, you play one gun and you keep it loaded. They cost a lot of resources, and trying to replace it with anything other than the second copy of Flamethrower tends to be a downgrade in power. So I like that this is pushing lots of guns as opposed to big guns. I just wish that it was pushing whatever it's pushing harder than it is. Because as it stands, I will never be too excited about a card I compare to Overpower level 2. It's nice to have, it's good in the decks it's good in, but it's not really something that I'm going to build around or be incredibly enthused to have bought in the first place. Next up, we have Artistic Inspiration. It's a 2-cost slotless talent asset, limit 1 per investigator and uses 1 inspiration. It is Lightning Bolt, exhaust Artistic Inspiration and discard a card from your hand, replenish 1 inspiration on this card. And what this inspiration gets used for is reaction. After revealing chaos tokens for a skill test you are performing, spend 1 inspiration, you get +1 or -1 skill value for this test. So essentially, you're turning discards into partial luckies. That's the main use of it. Using it for -1 would be for stuff like the science package where you want to pass by exactly 0 or exactly 2 or exactly 4, or I suppose exactly 1 and 3 with some of the more niche cards that I don't think of as being a core part of the package. The cost of discarding a card is pretty high though. Like even in Seeker, I typically don't have a lot of cards that are going to discard for less value than half a lucky. And especially in Seeker, I typically don't need lucky that often. This is most useful for its ability in the Mythos phase, but even then, there are better Mythos resilience options available. I think the main reason you would want this is if discarding cards is beneficial for your deck. We haven't seen enough interaction with this archetype. We don't have the full discard picture right now for me to really know if Artistic Inspiration is going to have a home somewhere. But I don't look at it and see a pushed card. I could be wrong about that. I could just be really underestimating how easy it is to discard cards. But I think realistically, if you're discarding cards that don't want to be discarded, if you're not discarding things that are, like for 2 discovery, winging it, that sort of thing. If you're discarding cards that are just discarded and lose all value, this is probably not good. This probably has to be played in a discard archetype. And I'm glad that exists, but I really can't picture it being a standout in that archetype. It's just there and okay is how it looks to me at a glance. I mentioned this in my review of Leo recently. In the last roundup, I just forgot to talk about the Luger, so I'm going to cover it again here. It is a 2-cost hand asset gun. It is uses 2 ammo, Lightning Bolt, exhaust the Luger, and spend 1 ammo. Fight, you get +1 fist for this attack. Or action, spend 1 resource, replenish all ammo on Luger P08, and ready it. So theoretically, this is the same as a Enchanted Blade against an enemy you're not engaged with, right? You can shoot it, reload it, shoot it again. And theoretically, it's, similar to an Enchanted Blade sometimes. Realistically, the fact that it might very rarely shoot over twice and be a functional 1-action, 2-damage weapon is not really the sales pitch of the card. The sales pitch is you have this in one hand and a real weapon in the other, and you use Lightning Bolt Beat Cop, basically, except now you're taking a test and using a hand slot with a cheaper asset. And honestly, that sounds pretty good. The most obvious comparison for this card is probably Garrote Wire, but Garrote Wire takes up an accessory slot in Rogue, something much more difficult to give up than a single hand slot in a fighter Rogue, and it also costs experience, which is a big deal. So I think Luger P08 does compare favorably to Garrote Wire, and while I personally almost never run Garrote Wire, it's because of the experience cost in the accessory slot, not because the effect is undesirable. I think Luger P08 is actually looking to be a really, really cool card, and I'm really looking forward to playing some decks that use it to see whether or not it's just good enough to see play or actually mainstay staple tier within Rogue weaponry. Next up, we have Library Pass level 5. This is the level 1 version that I covered before. And when I talked about this, I basically said, when you're using it to loop Necronomicon, it's obviously broken. When you're using it to loop a broken book, which Seeker will not have a huge difficulty doing, then it's going to be really powerful. But I feel like that's less Library Pass being broken as a card than it is the book you're comboing it with being broken. I think the level 1 Library Pass, 2 cost 1 experience item slot, it costs a resource to play the tome every turn, and then you have to lose the tome at the end of the turn. I think all of that put together results in, if you're doing anything strong with Library Pass, it's because you've comboed it with something broken and not because Library Pass is an independently powerful card. However, I cannot say the same thing about the upgraded Library Pass. For 5 experience, it becomes a permanent card. So essentially you replace 2 1 XP with 1 5 XP. It's only 3 experience more, but now you don't have to draw it, which is very important for a combo piece that it's just permanent. Then during your turn, if there's nothing attached to this, you can exhaust it and attach a tome from your hand. There's no resource cost anymore, which is incredible. And when your turn ends, if for some reason you don't want to put it on the bottom of your deck, you can pay a resource then to keep it. But the main thing is, you lose the 1 resource cost per turn cost of the card, and you start with it in play. These are both very massive upgrades. The original Library Pass, I said if you're doing anything strong with this, it's more about the book being broken than the Library Pass being good. That's not the case with Library Pass 5. Use it for Grim Memoir, use it for Scroll of Secrets, it doesn't matter. Any card you use this with is an insane card to be using this with. Even with like Scroll of Secrets, which is not an obviously good card to Library Pass, for 1 resource, you can keep it in play for a round, use it when you play it, use it during your next turn, and then replace it. And that's essentially getting 2/3 the value of a Scroll of Secrets without having played the action to put it into play, you know, the most expensive part of the card. The level 5 Library Pass is just absolutely cracked, and you will see just great decks built around this where Library Pass is the strong thing happening. And then when you start talking about the broken combos that were still actually quite good with Library Pass level 1, with this they'll be much better. You can assemble them much quicker. Not in terms of experience over the course of a campaign, but in terms of like how long it takes you to draw everything you need in a given scenario. So yeah, Library Pass level 5 looks absolutely crazy to me, unlike the first level one. It's a fairly massive upgrade. For 3 more experience, this is absolutely worth it. Which brings us to the reason this video had to come out early, because we're gonna be talking about Transfiguration for a while. It's a 2 experience event and a ritual. Choose another investigator card from your collection. Until the end of the game, treat the front of your investigator card as if it were the front of the chosen card. And what that means is your skill values, traits, abilities, and elder sign all change. However, there is a massive list of questions that this raises. A lot of them got clarified in the release, and some of them haven't yet been clarified. For instance, what color are you? Are you your original color? Are you both colors? You're probably not just the original color if you change colors, but it's not actually clear. There are also other weird things that weren't clarified, such as how do basements work? If I have 5 cards under Safina and I transform into Amanda, are those cards under Amanda, or do I have 2 separate basements? One for the half of me that's Safina and one for the half of me that is Amanda. Because there's a lot of stuff that was initially clarified, but honestly, I'm just not gonna worry about it because there's more clarification we need, and there's enough here to be insanely hyped around. People have already joked, like, can any Mystic be bottom tier if they threaten to transform into Gloria after session 1 immediately? And it's like, yeah, Jim's a lot better when he's actually Gloria in a disguise. I can't argue with that. But there's also a ton of nuance and interesting stuff happening with this card, so I'm gonna go through every investigator with access to it and talk about whether or not they're likely to want to be someone else, and if so, who. Before I move on to the specific investigators that can cover Transfiguration, I do want to just quickly say, there's no way to evaluate this card in a vacuum. This card is good based on who you are and who you're turning into. There's no general application analysis of the card. However, any analysis of the card will always include the following phrase: this is a 4 experience tax on your deck. You want to run a high draw deck to reliably find this because your game plan presumably involves being that other person rather urgently. And you do have to at some point spend an action to transform into them. Generally speaking, there are things that make this worse than being the person originally. If you can find strengths to counteract that, which definitely exist in terms of deck building rules, then great. That's a way to make up for the lost tempo and the deck demands it places on you. Additionally, being only tagged as a ritual, I think there's no way to search this out and no deck building rules that give you access to this. You just need a Mystic to if you're going to play this, and if you're going to find it, you're going to find it the hard way. And one last thing before I dive into all the investigators that can run this, This is my first impressions. There's no chance in hell with the card this complicated I don't miss something, but I will talk about the things that I immediately take note of. I've opened up every investigator that has access to Mystic level 2 cards, and I'm gonna start with the ones that are off class. Actually, that's not quite true. I'm gonna start with all the ones that very obviously don't want to transform. Daisy Walker has off class access to this in Mystic 0-2. Daisy Walker has a great ability, deck building rules that synergize with it, 5 book, the ability to handle her mythos stats no problem. I can't really imagine a reason you'd want to transform as Daisy, to be honest. Patrice does have a janky stat line, but the decks you build to play a Patrice, generally speaking, are not decks that translate well to other characters, because they're decks that don't run draw cards, decks that burn through everything they have at a breakneck pace, decks without long-term assets. I can see Patrice being able to use this and not being a bad deck, but I don't see it as being an obvious candidate for great use of this with Patrice. Coming over to some main class Mystics though, I can't imagine Gloria ever wants to be anyone else. She's already the best. What's there to transform into? Why would you want that? Dexter Drake is a character I view in the same vein. His stat line's already very good with 5 and head. Your deck is probably built around his ability. I can imagine you build a Dexter deck specifically to transform into someone else with this card pool for reasons unbeknownst to me currently, but I can't really imagine it's going to be meaningfully better than the base thing that Dexter is doing. Generally speaking, if you're a high tier Mystic, you probably don't have great reasons to try to spend your experience and your actions becoming someone else instead of building to your own strengths that already got you so high in the tier list to begin with. And for that reason, Jacqueline doesn't really want to transform into anyone else either. Other people may well want to transform into Jacqueline because, I mean, you know, she's Jacqueline, pretty good ability, pretty good stat line, easy to justify. But Jacqueline wouldn't be super tempted to transform out. Between recording this video and editing this video, I've taken some time to read some comments I've gotten already about Transfiguration, and I've also taken the time to go read the original discussion threads about Transfiguration, and it turns out that for a very specific and hilarious reason, Jacqueline might want to transform. And this is the beauty of this card. It opens up a world of jank nonsense and all of it looks crazy. So you are considered both investigators. And that means if something says that it affects Jacqueline fine, it affects whoever you are now. So if you turn into somebody with a reaction ability that has a limit, her signature, Arbiter of Fates, works on the new ability. And this is so complicated to try to think about it. It's gonna take so much time. I'm not even gonna worry about it myself. I'm just gonna wait and listen to the crazy shit other people tell me, but like, oh hell yeah, let's build around that. The thing Jacqueline does is her ability actually gets better, because the best thing Jacqueline does is negate the auto fail. So once you find Arbiter of Fates in your incredibly high draw Transfiguration Jacqueline deck, you transform into Mateo. And Arbiter of Fates makes your auto fail cancellation once per turn instead of once per game. That's confirmed by the devs, that's not speculation. And that's sick as hell. That is incredibly cool. Diana, I'm somewhat torn on. You could build a pretty cool Diana deck that transformed into someone else intending to fight with her Guardian 0-2, but because she has a 35 card deck and to accelerate through that deck you need cancels anyway, it sort of feels to me like a Diana using, not Transmogrify. Transfiguration, that's the name of it. Transmogrify, Transform, Transfiguration, we'll figure it out eventually. But I really can't see a world where a Transfigured Diana is like the coolest, most powerful thing a Diana can do. It just strikes me as a different way to play Diana that's not necessarily better or worse. I will note with Diana, Twilight Blade exists, and we don't have dev clarification yet on how basements work. If this allows you to play cards out from under George Barnaby's basement, which is just the old cards that were under Diana, we need to know if there are 2 basements now. We don't know how this works exactly, if you just lose access to the old basement, whatever. There's a world where Diana is the best user to transfigure in the entire game by far, depending on the ruling of Twilight Blade. I'm assuming we don't live in that world for the time being. And even though I don't have the greatest opinion of Kohaku, I also don't look at Kohaku and think he's a character that really wants to run Transfigure either. His deck building rules aren't the best, so if you want to transfigure into someone else, I don't really know why you'd pick Kohaku. And if you were using his deck building rules to some major benefit, building Bless or Curse or Blurs, then you probably benefit a lot from continuing to be Kohaku, so I don't really see Kohaku being a great user for it either. Next up on the long list of characters where I can't really justify why I'd be using Transfigure on them specifically, we have Norman Withers. Typically speaking, when you're playing Norman, you're putting a lot of cards in your deck that are really, really good because of Norman's ability. And then if you suddenly started being someone else, those cards would start being way, way less good than they previously were. So I just don't really see it with Norman. Oh, and I suppose I should mention the parallel fronts of investigators as well. Parallel Father Mateo is not going to switch investigators ever. That's ridiculous. He's one of the best investigator fronts in the game. He's obviously never using Transfigure. Which leaves me with the following group of characters where I look at them and I think I might actually really be able to find some cool uses for Transfigure. Original Agnes Baker, so often I just don't see a great use for her ability. The opportunity cost of running cards like Painkillers is so much higher these days that I tend to think Agnes is best off basically not caring about this ability, which means she's a great candidate. I mean, the best part of her by far is her card pool, so it makes a lot of sense to look at Transfigure in an Agnes Baker. Original Mateo basically doesn't have a card front. Once you use it, like if you're not building around farming the star, then he has a once per game ability. You don't even know you're going to trigger that ability in a timely fashion. You are very happy to stop being Original Father Mateo unless you are specifically building a really all-in token fishing deck. Both versions of Jim Culver really don't have a reason to stay in their vanilla fronts. Vanilla Jim basically doesn't have a card front, but Parallel Jim, if you're not playing specifically a curse deck, which you really don't have to do, can benefit a lot from becoming someone else. And since you can play with the original Gem back and not be stuck on Mystic 0-3 and you can find a lot more things to do, I think there's probably something to be said for Transfigure here as well. Marie Lambeau is a character where I often find myself not reliably able to trigger her ability, and the best part of her is tending to be her deck building, allowing you to do a little bit of weird stuff. And the little bit of weird stuff tends to come down to stuff with Astronomical Atlas or Archaic Glyphs, and those are probably better used than other characters. Luke Robinson, because we do have clarification that you're considered to be both investigators simultaneously. If Luke transforms into, say, Jacqueline, you are simultaneously Luke and Jacqueline. So that means that you will be able to enter your gatebox worlds within worlds. So Luke Robinson is a character where a lot of decks don't make a ton of use of this connecting location secondary effect. You still have your gatebox in play. Sure, you won't get a star that puts charges on it anymore, but you got Luke's incredible deck building, you got Luke's incredible gatebox, and you just bail and become somebody else with better stats. This is all right for head-based Luke if you become like a Jacqueline, but for book-based Luke, who can jump from like 3 book without a relevant ability to like, say, Harvey, that is a tremendous increase in power for a book-based Luke, to the point it's no longer like an edge case deck, but probably a very strong thing you can do. Amina Zidane has 3s in all of her stats, and her ability that generates Doom is a setup ability where you make things cheaper at the start of the game. So yeah, Amina Zidane's actually a pretty solid candidate for this, because you can get the most value of her ability out of the first 3 or 4 turns of the game while you're finding this and transforming. You might still have to deal with some problems with Doom management, and that could be awkward if you're trying to build Doom management for the setup phase and not just immediately bail on her. I don't know that Amina plays comfortably with Transfigure, but it's definitely on her radar. Safina is a great candidate for this. Oftentimes you see Safina decks that either give up on head or give up on foot, and they go all in one or the other. No matter which one you're doing, there are better stat lines and character fronts. You've already gotten the effect once you're Safina, right? You just don't build a deck designed to put cards under you. Instead, you build a deck designed to take a 13-card mulligan and look for Transfigure and become someone else who's better at your job. Maybe it's Winifred, maybe it's Kaimani, maybe it's Gloria, maybe it's Jacqueline. There are 5-head and 5-foot characters in the game that do whatever Safina deck you're playing better than Safina does. And lastly, we have Sister Mary. The main obstacle with Sister Mary tends to be, how do you fix your fist? What if you just were a character that had 5 fists? I have built entire Sister Mary decks single-handedly dedicated to just fixing my fist. And this is a single card that threatens to do that better than anything else. You still get the value of the starting blesses as Sister Mary, and then you transform into someone else with an ancestral token, and your weakness is still in your deck, so that fucking sucks for the blessed team you're in, I guess. But the point is, there are characters where Sister Mary transforming is a meaningful benefit to her, and this gets into the other half of Transfigure, where there are certain characters that are made much weaker by either their signature weaknesses or their deck building. As an example, Tommy Muldoon's weakness makes Tommy Muldoon unable to safely play all of his assets and just go ham until he draws his weakness, which he has no way to tutor. Daniela Reyes is clearly designed not to get access to high-level Guardian weapons. Do you know who does have access to those weapons? Sister Mary, and she wolts Daniela's 5 fists. She's coming for that stat line. So I'm not going to cover every character in the game in any great detail. I'm going to watch the community as they talk about this and like slowly take notes more and more about how the characters interact with this, because it's a card where there is so much cooking to be done. But I will go back through these characters and talk about like some obvious Transfigure uses for each one and how I think they're most, like, I'm not going to plan out decks for this. It's too complicated, support's still coming, but there's enough going on for me to talk about what has me hyped for each of these characters And with Sister Mary, I've already covered it. Sister Mary just transforms into Daniela, right? You use Transfigure, you stop being Sister Mary, you start being Daniela, you suddenly have 2 more fists and an incredible ability, and suddenly your Daniela deck is running Runic Axe level 10, or Flamethrower, or Blessed Blade level 4, or Survival Knife level 2, and most importantly, Guard Dog level 2, right? Like, all the stuff that Daniela is like, oh, I wish I could run that, she gets it now. Nothing in Daniela decks that you were super hyped about, at least for me, was a red card. Replacing all that red shit with like Promise of Power and Ward of Protection, I am so down for that. So I think Sister Mary transfigured into Daniela is one of the most immediate and powerful things that came to mind when I first saw this card. Coming back to Safina, I'm looking at characters that have high foot when I think about Transfigure. Her card pool is worse for building a head-based deck in general. If you're playing the scrappy version of Safina that's using like baseline Read the Signs and Drawn to the Flame and some Foot Matter stuff, that's not going to be optimized for a Transfigure deck. I think when you build into Foot Matter Safina is where you're going to see the best use out of a Transfigure in her. And in that respect, I don't know that I'd want to be Winifred, because if you're building that Foot Matters deck for Winifred specifically and you don't hit Transfigure, I think Safina just doesn't function. I think like you're too all in on finding exactly Transfigure and the deck wouldn't function without it. You would just use up your skills and run out of steam. So I want to be somebody else. And I think I'm leaning towards either Finn due to his 4 foot and free evade, or I'd be leaning towards a Lucius Galloway. I don't know what all support's coming out for him yet, but 4 book, 5 foot is a good stat line. His ability does threaten to get some clues. You don't have to play with his signature weakness. But also when I look at Safina, she's got a pretty gross signature weakness. The character she's transforming into, it's like, with Mary going into Daniela, I'm uniquely mitigating weaknesses of Daniela, right? I feel like that might be better than Daniela in some ways. But with Safina, I'm having a hard time really selling myself on a specific version. It's a thing where I have to look at a lot of decks for it, and like, I'm not confident right now that Transfigure Safina is going to be good, but I definitely see the possibility for something there. With Amina, there's not a lot to talk about, right? It's Amina, your stats are 3s across the board. You don't want those to be your stats. Transform into literally anyone with 5 head. This is the sort of argument that's gonna make ranking Mystics next year much more annoying, when it's like, not only do we have to deal with the argument that a 4-head Mystic's good enough to beat every campaign consistently, now we also have to deal with the argument that every 4-head Mystic is also just waiting to be Jacqueline or Gloria, depending on circumstance. You don't even have to commit ahead of time. Now that said, Amina tends to do something very similar to what Sister Mary's doing, where she's playing very desperately to fix her 3 in head. In my opinion, the best card in Amina by a fucking mile is Cat Mask. And that will remain true. Cat Mask will keep being fine once you transform, but just having a card that is effectively a permanent 2 boost ahead in a Head Matters deck, that's kind of insane. It's really easy to justify transforming into any 5-head investigator as Amina. Probably your best bet is Jacqueline, but you could do some deck warping, be a little bit worse before transform, and then be Gloria after the transform. I personally think that might be the wrong way to go about it. I don't want to be drawing Alyssa Graham in my Amina deck when I'm not Gloria yet, so I'd probably be more inclined to play a Jacqueline deck, especially because with Jacqueline, no one's relying on Jacqueline to do their job, right? But if you're supposed to be Gloria and you're just Amina for like 8 turns, people might die because you were Amina for 8 turns if they were trusting you to mitigate the Mythos phase and you just couldn't do it. So that's why I lean towards probably Jacqueline as the go-to de facto 5-head transformation for anyone who's just looking to boost their stats. With Luke, I actually want to talk about him mostly in the context of book Luke. Like, sure, if you want to be slightly better, you can look at Transfigure as a permanent Holy Rosary that is going to, once it's in play, I mean, it can't be Crypt Shield. A permanent Holy Rosary that gives you a new, better ability if you turn into Jacqueline. But at the same time, I'm not super interested in spending the experience on that. It's not bad, it's just not something I'm super hyped about. What I am very hyped about is the idea of playing book-based Luke and transfiguring into someone with 5 book. And in that regard, it's time to mention the coolest thing that just happened with Transfigure getting released. Mandy just got untabooed and she starts with a gate box now. How do you like that? Does that make you feel disgusting? Do you feel gross just hearing those words? And obviously this isn't really Mandy, right? You only get Seeker 0 to 2, and the Mystic cards you're getting are probably not better than what Mandy would have gotten. Additionally, you start the game not being Mandy, you start the game being a 3-book Seeker, but dude, playing Luke Robinson and turning into Mandy sounds so gross. I am so ready to try that deck, and I've already played Mr. Rook level 0 and Luke and thought it was great. It's not a card where like Luke is upset to run this. You can dig your angry place out early, his signature weakness. We call it his angry place. We call Datebox's happy place and his weakness is angry place. So you dig that out on an unimportant turn once you're already done with your turn, and ideally when you're hoping to get a free move out of being booted out of it. And you search out super important cards such as the asset you need to do your job. You're a mystic. So Mr. Rook was already fine in Luke, who wanted the health soak as well. Using this to turn him into Mandy is actually looking a little bit gross. Coming over to Marie, it gets into the weird middle ground that some characters have, and I'm just gonna cover Marie, both Gems, and Mateo all at once, because these characters are making pretty much the exact same arguments. They all have forehead. The front of their character card is not necessarily something that's gonna give you a lot of value in many of their decks. Mateo gets 1 cancel and a good star. Gem gets nothing. Parallel Gem, if you are a curse build, gets something. If you are not a curse build, you get a little bit less. Like the curse build's not even particularly crazy. I tend to see mystics have plenty of charges, and to the point where I'm not even convinced that as sick as this sounds, it's very good. And with Marie Lambeau, you have to have the ability to manage Doom, which costs you a lot of experience in your early scenarios managing the Doom. All of these characters have relatively weak card fronts, where building into them isn't even that much stronger than completely ignoring them, if it even is stronger in the first place. That's even, and some of these characters, Mateo and Gem, it's up for debate. So all of these characters can just easily look at Transfigure as gain 1 head, get Jacqueline's ability, right? Every single one of them can just turn into Jacqueline and be better than they were. Now, Agnes, I really don't know I'd ever build to transform, because getting a better ability might not be worth it. Her stat line's already as good as it can really be. But one of the more interesting things to look at is how everyone's cards, Mystic 0 to 5, Survivor 2 in Agnes's case, interact with every conceivable other investigator now. And additionally, how their signatures interact, because there might be unique broken things where one card pull interacts with a signature in a way that's entirely unintended and crazy broken. So Agnes Baker, I could see somebody building an Agnes deck that doesn't care about this ability at all, and they're just like, screw it. It's probably better to transform into Jacqueline than to have this ability. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But I think this card is at its most interesting by far. When you can find interactions like the one with Sister Mary, there's a reason I talked about it first. When your character has a unique problem, you're built as a fighter with 3 fists, and your solution isn't just +2 fist, but it uniquely overcomes the limitations of Daniela. I think Sister Mary transfigure into Daniela is one of the most obvious powerful things this can do. I think book-based Luke into essentially an untabooed Mandy is also up there in terms of crazy decks that might actually be very, very good. And I think the characters that are just using it to get a better ability and +1 head are not that impressive. It's definitely good in those characters, but where it's going to do the most insane things are they're the ones that are much harder to figure out, right? Where it's not immediately obvious that something's going to break, but this card has so much potential. Anyway, in closing, I have no doubt that a lot of people watching this video are like, I cannot believe that you missed X. Fucking tell me about it. There's a lot to miss. I would love to hear whatever you know about this card that I don't. This is gonna be one of the coolest things to come out of Drowned City, and I love this card to bits. Also probably a balanced nightmare. It did accidentally untaboo Mandy, so you know that's gonna be rough. Can't wait until Luke gets tabooed. I think the most Mandy thing possible in the entire world is to get Luke tabooed. Anyways, that's all for now. I've been Rather Incoherent. Thank you for your time. If you made it this far, then please do hit all the buttons to make the algorithm happy. And a massive thank you to everyone supporting this channel, both as patrons over on Patreon and here on YouTube as channel members. I'll see all of you in the next one.